I think we've got something special here. What do you reckon? I agree, but we need to refine the approach to this.
A story about pride, forgiveness, and the power of real apology. Hollywood, 1958. Two of the biggest legends in cinema. Two men who should have been friends. But instead, they were enemies. James Stewart walked away every single time Dean Martin tried to speak to him. James wouldn't look at him, wouldn't listen to him, wouldn't give him a chance. For 3 years, this Cold War continued. Hollywood gossip was everywhere. People were choosing sides. The friendship was broken, and nobody thought it could ever be repaired. But then something happened in a canyon. Something that Dean Martin did that was so unexpected, so genuine, so powerful that it changed everything. This is a story about what it takes to truly apologize, and what it takes to truly forgive, and how two legends taught the world something about being human. When friendship turned to silence. To understand this story, you need to understand how these two men came to be enemies in the first place. James Stewart was one of the greatest actors in cinema history. He had a career that spanned decades. He was in It's a Wonderful Life, one of the most beloved movies of all time. He was in westerns and dramas and comedies. His voice was distinctive. His mannerisms were unique. He was respected by audiences and by critics. James Stewart represented something important in American cinema: authenticity, integrity, and genuine talent. James was also a military man. During World War II, he had served as a pilot. He had flown combat missions. He had lived a life beyond acting that was grounded in service and sacrifice. This shaped who he was. It made him serious. It made him principled. Dean Martin was a different kind of performer. He was a singer, a comedian, an actor. He was charming and funny. He could make people laugh with just a look. He was talented in a way that seemed effortless. He appeared on television. He made movies. He was part of the famous Rat Pack that included Frank Sinatra and others. Dean represented something different: fun, spontaneity, and living in the moment. In the 1950s, both men were at the height of their careers. They moved in similar circles in Hollywood. They attended the same events. They had mutual friends. But in 1955, something happened that damaged their relationship. They were both invited to perform at a charity event. It was supposed to be a fun evening to raise money for a good cause. James had prepared a serious musical number. He was going to sing a beautiful song. He was taking it seriously because the money was going to help children. Dean arrived at the event in high spirits. He was looking forward to making people laugh. He didn't prepare much. He figured he'd go out there and be funny, do some jokes, and everything would be fine. When it came time for their performances, something went wrong. James went on first and performed his serious musical number. It was beautiful. The audience was moved. The applause was respectful and warm. Then Dean went on. But instead of doing his own act, Dean decided to mock James's performance. He did an imitation of James. He exaggerated James's mannerisms. He made the serious song seem silly. He turned something that James had put real thought and care into a joke. The audience laughed. Some people laughed very hard. Dean was doing what he always did, making people laugh. But James was not laughing. James watched from the wings as his performance was being mocked. He watched as Dean turned his sincerity into comedy. He watched as the audience laughed at him instead of with the beauty of what he'd tried to create. When Dean came off the stage, he was happy. He thought he'd done a great job. He didn't realize how much he'd hurt his friend. Later that night, James told Dean directly, "That was disrespectful. You mocked something I cared about. In front of all those people." Dean tried to laugh it off. "Come on, James, it was just a joke. It was for fun. Nobody meant anything by it." But James didn't see it that way. "It wasn't funny to me. And that's the point. You should have asked before you did something like that. You should have respected what I was trying to do." From that moment on, things were different. James began walking away whenever Dean tried to speak to him. At parties, James would see Dean and excuse himself. At industry events, if Dean approached, James would turn and walk the other way. If they ended up in the same room, James would keep his distance. He wouldn't be rude. He just wouldn't engage. It was a cold shoulder, delivered quietly and completely. Dean tried many times to repair the friendship. He tried joking about it. He tried being serious. He tried approaching James at events. He tried sending messages through mutual friends. But every time he tried, James would simply walk away. 3 years went by. 3 years of this Cold War. Hollywood noticed. People talked about it. Some people sided with James, saying Dean had been disrespectful. Some people sided with Dean, saying James was being too sensitive. But the reality was simple. 2 men who had been friendly were no longer speaking. And nobody seemed able to fix it. Dean was genuinely sorry. He had been thinking about what he'd done, and he understood now that he had hurt James. But apologies weren't working. James wouldn't listen. That's when Dean decided to do something completely different. When words failed, actions spoke. In 1958, Dean and James were both filming westerns in Arizona. They were working at different locations, but not too far apart. The productions would be happening at roughly the same time. Dean heard that James was filming in a canyon near the town of Sedona. The location was called Cathedral Canyon, a place of incredible natural beauty with red rocks and towering walls. Dean made a decision. He was going to go to that canyon. He wasn't going to ambush James or force a confrontation, but he was going to find a way to do something that might finally get James to listen. So Dean drove out to Cathedral Canyon. He talked to some crew members and found out when James would be filming a specific scene. The scene was going to be filmed early in the morning, with just James, another actor, and the camera crew. Dean arrived at the canyon before dawn. He was alone. He didn't tell anyone he was coming. He just positioned himself where he could see the filming location without being obvious. When the sun came up and the crew began setting up, Dean watched. He watched as James arrived on set. He watched as they prepared the scene. He watched as James prepared himself emotionally for the role. And then Dean made his move. Instead of approaching James directly, instead of trying to talk to him, Dean did something unexpected. He started singing. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't funny. It was raw and genuine. Dean was singing in the canyon, where the acoustics made his voice echo off the red rock walls. He was singing one of his most beautiful songs, a song about friendship and regret. James heard the singing. Everyone on set heard it. They looked around confused, trying to figure out where the voice was coming from. Then they realized it was Dean Martin, standing alone in the canyon, singing with his whole heart, singing about being sorry, singing about missing his friend. James's director was angry. The filming was being interrupted. "Cut! Cut!" he shouted. "Who is that? Get him off this set." But James put up his hand. "Wait," James said. "Let him finish." Dean kept singing. He didn't care that people were staring at him. He didn't care that the filming had stopped. He just kept singing. His voice carried across the canyon, echoing off the rocks. It was beautiful and heartbreaking and completely genuine. When Dean finished, there was silence. Everyone was quiet. The crew didn't know what to do. The director was waiting for James to decide what should happen next. James walked toward Dean. Dean's heart was pounding. He didn't know if James was going to tell him to leave. He didn't know if James was finally going to let him say something. He didn't know if this whole thing had been a mistake. When James reached him, James was crying. "I've been so angry," James said quietly. "So angry for so long. I told myself it was about what you did at that event. But really, it was about feeling disrespected. It was about my pride." Dean was also crying now. "I'm sorry," he said. "I've been sorry for 3 years. But you wouldn't let me say it. So I didn't know what else to do." James looked at Dean for a long moment. Then he hugged him. It wasn't a quick, brief hug. It was a long embrace. 2 men who had been friends, who had become enemies, who had now found their way back to each other. The camera crew was filming. The director didn't know what to do. This wasn't part of the movie. This was real life, unfolding in front of them. When James and Dean separated, James looked at him. "I'm sorry too," James said. "I'm sorry for shutting you out. I'm sorry for not giving you a chance to apologize. I let my pride get in the way of something that mattered. Can we start again?" Dean asked. "We already have," James said. "The moment you sang in that canyon, we started again." When forgiveness healed an old wound. The story of what happened in Cathedral Canyon spread through Hollywood like wildfire. The film crew had been filming when it happened, and some of them couldn't resist sharing the story. Within days, major newspapers and entertainment magazines had picked it up. The story wasn't about scandal or drama. It was about reconciliation. It was about 2 men who had been divided finding their way back to each other. And people were moved by it. What made the story powerful was that Dean didn't try to force reconciliation. He didn't demand that James listen. Instead, Dean did something that proved his sincerity through action and artistry. He sang. He made himself vulnerable. He put his heart out there in front of everyone. And James recognized that vulnerability. James understood that it took real courage to do what Dean had done. After that day in the canyon, James and Dean became friends again. Not like they were before, but better, in some ways. Because the friendship was now grounded in mutual understanding and forgiveness. They were seen together at Hollywood events. They would sit together at dinners. They would laugh and joke. The Cold War was officially over. More than that, they became examples of something important. They showed Hollywood and the world that pride doesn't have to be permanent. They showed that people can find their way back from anger and hurt. They showed that forgiveness is possible when people are willing to be vulnerable. James later talked about what happened in the canyon. In an interview, he said, "Dean taught me something important that day. He taught me that real strength isn't holding on to anger. Real strength is being humble enough to apologize and being wise enough to forgive." The story became part of Hollywood legend. People told it at parties. People referenced it in interviews about friendship and forgiveness. But more importantly, the reconciliation changed how both men thought about their careers and their lives. James became more open to people. He became less rigid about things. He understood that perfection and pride could sometimes get in the way of real connection. Dean, for his part, learned something too. He learned that actions speak louder than words. He learned that sometimes, genuine apology requires real vulnerability. He learned that friendship was worth the risk of putting yourself out there completely. The two men went on to work together occasionally. They were never in a major film together, but they crossed paths at industry events and supported each other's work. More importantly, they had a real friendship that lasted until James passed away in 1997. When James died, Dean was one of the people most affected. At James's memorial service, Dean talked about the man who had forgiven him. He talked about the importance of that forgiveness. He talked about how that moment in the canyon had changed his life. What real apology and real forgiveness look like. This story teaches us something we desperately need to understand in our modern world. Real apology is about changing your actions, not just saying you're sorry. Dean said "I'm sorry" to James many times. But James didn't believe him. Why? Because apologies are easy. Anyone can say the words. But apologies without action are just empty words. What changed things was when Dean did something that proved his sincerity. He drove to a canyon. He woke up before dawn. He made himself vulnerable in front of a film crew and cameras. He sang his heart out. That wasn't easy. That was risky. That was real. When James saw that Dean was willing to risk ridicule and rejection to apologize, James understood that the apology was genuine. The action proved it. Think about this in your own life. How many times have you heard someone say "I'm sorry" without meaning it? How many times have you heard it and thought, but you haven't changed? You're doing the same thing again. That's because apologies without action are meaningless. Real apology requires change. Real apology requires vulnerability. Real apology requires sacrifice. This story also teaches us, ***, pride is expensive. It costs us relationships. It costs us friendships. It costs us happiness. James held onto his pride for 3 years. For 3 years, he refused to listen to Dean. For 3 years, he walked away. For 3 years, he was angry. And during those 3 years, he lost out on a friendship that mattered. Think about how much time James lost being angry instead of being friends. Think about how many moments of laughter and connection were lost because of pride. Pride is one of the most destructive emotions we can hold on to. It keeps us stuck. It keeps us angry. It keeps us isolated. And usually, the person who suffers most from our pride is us. There's also a lesson about vulnerability and strength. ***, real strength isn't about never admitting you're wrong. Real strength is being brave enough to admit you're wrong and do something about it. Dean was vulnerable when he sang in that canyon. He was putting himself out there. He was risking rejection. He could have been told to leave. He could have been publicly humiliated. But he did it anyway. That took real courage. And James showed strength too. He showed strength in being able to admit that his pride had been getting in the way. He showed strength in being willing to forgive. In our culture, we often think of strength as not needing anyone, not asking for help, not admitting mistakes. But that's not real strength. Real strength is the opposite. Real strength is admitting you were wrong. Real strength is being vulnerable. Real strength is choosing connection over pride. This story also teaches us, Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, not just the other person. When James forgave Dean, James got his friend back. James got to stop being angry. James got to experience connection and friendship again. Forgiveness freed James from the burden of holding on to anger. That's what forgiveness does. It doesn't mean what the other person did was okay. It doesn't mean you have to forget. But it means you stop letting that hurt control you. It means you choose peace over anger. And that choice changes your life. There's also an important lesson about how we show up for people we care about. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is show them you care through action, not words. Dean didn't try to convince James to listen to words. Dean showed James that he cared by putting himself out there in a beautiful, vulnerable way. Actions spoke louder than any words could have. Finally, this story teaches us, friendship is worth fighting for. Friendship is worth being vulnerable for. Friendship is worth the risk. Dean could have just let the friendship go. He could have thought, James doesn't want to be my friend, so I'll move on. That would have been the easy path. But Dean decided friendship was worth fighting for. He decided to take a risk. He decided to be vulnerable. And because he made that choice, he got his friendship back. In our modern world, we often give up too easily. If someone hurts us, we cut them off. If someone won't listen to us, we move on. But real friendship requires persistence. Real friendship requires fighting through the hard times. Real friendship requires believing that it's worth it. So here's the question for you. Is there someone you've been angry at? Is there someone whose friendship you've lost? What would it take for you to be brave enough to do what Dean did? What would it take for you to be humble enough to do what James did? Because that's what creates real human connection. That's what heals broken relationships. That's what makes life meaningful. James Stewart and Dean Martin taught us something profound in Cathedral Canyon. They taught us that it's never too late to apologize. They taught us that it's never too late to forgive. They taught us that pride is a poor substitute for friendship. And they taught us that real strength looks like vulnerability and humility. Like and subscribe. This incredible story of forgiveness and friendship just proved that it's never too late to repair broken relationships. If this story of two legends reconciling in a canyon inspired you to think about your own relationships and what forgiveness could mean, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to watch more stories about real people making real choices to heal and connect. In the comments below, tell us, have you ever had to apologize for something you regretted? Have you ever had to forgive someone who hurt you? Share your story because your experience could inspire thousands of people to choose forgiveness over pride. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss another story about people choosing love over anger, connection over isolation. Subscribe now and join our community of people who believe that genuine apology and true forgiveness are some of the most powerful forces in the world. ***.